Hello, everyone, and welcome to Novara Live. I'm your host, Dalia Gebrial, and I'm joined today once again by the wonderful Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG. Helena, how are you doing today, girl?
I'm not doing too bad at all. I'm enjoying all of the quiet and the grown-up politics that we were promised with the Labour government. It's been excellent so far this week.
We're in safe hands now. The grown-ups are in the room. They've taken over. Don't you guys all feel like that? I mean, I'm having a fantastic time. My mental health is 10 out of 10 right now. Coming up tonight, we have an interview with Aseel Baidoun from Medical Aid for Palestinians. The Labour government gears up for even more cuts in the spring statement. In just 3 days, Israel has killed 200 children in Gaza. That's according to the Enclave's health ministry, who say over 500 Palestinians have died since Israel tore up the ceasefire on Monday. One man who lost everything is Ala Abu Hilal, after Israel ripped his entire family from his life in Khan Yunis on Wednesday. In this clip, he talks about his 1-year-old son, Mohammed.
Look, his teeth were starting to come in. Oh, my dear son, go up to heaven. You're going to find all your toys up there. Up there is much better, my dear son, much better. Mohammed, he was my firstborn, my first son. My whole life, he was my entire life. I swear he was my world. Everyone who met him loved him. He brought joy to everyone. He was a breeze. He was very smart, praise to God. But he belongs with his Creator. God has blessed me with him, and now he calls for him. I was starting my life. I was building a family. I was looking forward to building a life with my wife and having children with her. No matter what the circumstances, whether it's a war or whatever, we wanted to live. But the situation has shattered our dreams, praise to God. I took my wife and son there so they can be safe, so I can protect them and give them a dignified life.
Ala did what any mother or father would have done. He moved his family to Al-Mawasi, an area that Israel has long designated as a safe zone. And of course, it wasn't safe. As we've said too many times to count in the last 18 months, when Israel decides to start slaughtering Palestinians, nowhere in Gaza is safe. And that proved to be the case last night. This morning alone, 110 Palestinians were killed in pre-dawn attacks across Gaza, among them a newborn baby alongside several other children. In the south of the Strip, explosions lit up the sky over Rafah as the sounds of destruction rang out. 20 people were killed after the Israeli missiles struck a string of houses. Meanwhile, in the Strip's north, at least 7 were killed when a family home was bombed. Reporting for Al Jazeera, journalist Tarek Abu Azoum said this about the assaults. The Israeli attacks across the Gaza Strip have intensified, especially at dawn, when at least 11 residential buildings were flattened by the Israeli forces. There has been a clear strategic approach that Israel has been using, which does not pass any sort of warning to the civilians before striking the buildings that they are taking refuge in. 49,600 people have now been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. According to Israel, though, the mass extermination of Palestinians in their tens of thousands is the acceptable collateral cost of their war with Hamas. But in a message to Gaza's residents, new Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz revealed that the indiscriminate bombing and outrageous slaughter is completely intentional.
Residents of Gaza, this is your final warning. The first Sinwar destroyed Gaza, and the second Sinwar will bring upon it total ruin. The Israeli Air Force's attack against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What follows will be far harsher, and you will bear the full cost. Evacuation of the population from combat zones will soon resume. If all Israeli hostages are not released and Hamas is not kicked out of Gaza, Israel will act with force you have not known before. Take the advice of the US president, return the hostages and kick out Hamas, and new options will open up for you, including relocation to other parts of the world for those who choose. The alternative is destruction and total devastation.
So Katz there is not even trying to hide it. If you're a Palestinian civilian, a Palestinian child even, turn on Hamas, force them to release the hostages, whether or not you even know where they are. Otherwise, you A mother, a father, a child will bear the full brunt of our bombs. But it's not just Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet who are hungry for a resumption of the genocide in Gaza. Many Knesset members are behind a fresh onslaught too. Channel 4's Secunda Kermani asked some of them what they thought of resuming the onslaught.
Most of the hostage families are against resuming the war. Most of the Israeli public is against resuming the war. Why is your government doing it?
None of the so-called facts you just stated are correct. Some families are against. I don't judge the families, not at all. But looking about Israeli strategy, we cannot have Hamas stay in Gaza. We're not going to leave our sons and grandchildren to deal with their sons and grandchildren. We're going to end this now.
How? How are you going to end it?
You're going to conquer Gaza.
You're not going.
We're going to conquer Gaza, and we're going to work together with our American allies in starting the Trump plan for
ethnic cleansing. But a lot of people would say.
A lot of people would say, I don't care about what other people would say. I care about what we say. I care about our interests.
Netanyahu has his own priorities. It looks as if the hostages are not the top of his priorities. And this is why things are not being done the way the majority of Israelis would have wanted it to be done.
It has been proven that only military pressure brings a good deal.
A year and a half of very intense war with a lot of civilian casualties in Gaza shows that it's not possible to militarily alone defeat Hamas.
A year and a half under the Biden administration that forced us to fight Hamas with one hand, but to feed them with the other. So I can tell you that now the war is going to be handled in a totally different way. With the Trump administration, with the backing of America, Trump himself said numerous times that all hell should break on Gaza if they're not bringing back all hostages.
What does unleashing hell look like? I mean, you've already seen under, as you say, the Biden administration, daily death tolls of around 400 people a day.
You will see exactly what it means.
It's not often that we actually see a journalist pushing Israeli officials in that way to exactly clarify what they mean. And when you do push it and you do get them to clarify, you get what we saw there, which was a man saying, some people call it ethnic cleansing. I don't really care if that's what they call it. I don't really care if it looks, smells, feels like ethnic cleansing. I mean, it's honest at least. But I also think that the question there, when another thing that I thought was really telling was that he said, the Biden administration forced us to fight with one hand and feed Gaza on the other. I mean, I don't think the Biden administration really did force anyone to force them to feed Gazans or do anything really for the Gazan population. But what he's indicating there is that now with the Trump plan, now with the backing of Trump, what they will be able to do is simultaneously, and what they are doing now, and what they have been doing, quite frankly, but he's just coming out and saying it, is simultaneously bombard, have this an army, a country that is armed to the teeth, that is probably the most militaristically advanced, one of the most militaristically advanced armies that have ever existed in the history of the world, against a group of people that don't even have an army, that not only will we be bombarding them with all of the force that we have demonstrated, but we're also going to strategically starve them of aid, of food, of everything that you need to survive. And he says, we know that we can win this war militaristically. Starving an entire civilian population is not like the legitimate rules of war. This is not like a norm of war. That is genocidal intent. That is genocide. And that is what he is proudly coming out and saying. And I guess what's changed between the Biden and the Trump administration is that they're now just feel so emboldened that they are able to name what they have been doing for the past year. But decimating the Gaza Strip and all who live within it is not enough for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, especially when there are territorial gains to be made elsewhere. This was Netanyahu speaking after visiting Israeli troops occupying the West Bank.
I am here, in the undercover unit in Judea and Samaria, which is the tip of our spear that penetrates and throws the terrorist enemy off balance. Simply, they're doing sacred work for the state of Israel. Because while we are waging a fierce war against Hamas and the Gaza Strip, we are aware of the possibility of a larger and stronger front emerging here in Judea and Samaria. Therefore, the work of the border police, the Israel police, and the Israeli military, in cooperation with these forces and our special units, is yielding many results for the security of Israel's citizens.
It's a little bizarre to talk about a second front opening only now, when Israel ramped up its violent targeting of West Bank communities as soon as the Gaza ceasefire began in January. Under a sustained Israeli assault, thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank have been displaced, forced to relocate under the threat of violence, as Israeli troops and armored vehicles have swept through the territories. The Jenin refugee camp, often thought of as the heart of the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank, has come under particularly harsh attack. It's now almost completely empty, with large sections of the area flattened by bulldozers. Meanwhile, these Israeli soldiers were captured on film apparently looting homes earlier this month, loading up wheelbarrows with the belongings of those Palestinians who have fled. Near Jericho, the Israeli military used bulldozers to destroy a solar energy system belonging to the Palestinian community in Marjet. You can see the machines here, punching through the glass panels. Dura has also recently been stormed by Israeli forces, with military tanks and armoured vehicles seen speeding into the community. Earlier today, I was joined from the West Bank by Aseel Baidoun, Medical Aid for Palestinians Advocacy Manager in the Palestinian territory. I began by asking her about the medical situation on the ground in Gaza.
What we're hearing from the ground, since we already have a medical team at the Nasser Hospital in south of Gaza, we are hearing that the situation of the health sector is catastrophic. We have 16 months of constant Israeli bombardment and dismantling of the healthcare system. So the healthcare system was already dismantled even before the renewal of these airstrikes. We have more than 1,000 healthcare workers killed. And now we know that only 22 out of 38 hospitals are partially functioning. And since March, we know that there was a complete siege enforced on Gaza. So we have lack of medical supplies. We don't have medical equipment coming in. There's an issue with medications. So the health workers are not coping with the influx of injuries that they are receiving at hospitals. In addition to, they are also people from Gaza who have been displaced, lost loved ones, lost colleagues. So cannot actually explain how catastrophic the situation is.
Yes, it really is beyond words. Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that a new front in Israel's war on Palestine could open up in the West Bank. Has this come as a surprise to you or others living in the territories?
Did it look like we were living in peace before? So, I mean, let me start with the very recent updates. Since the announcement of the ceasefire, we have a gate of hell opened on people in the West Bank. Since I'm from the West Bank, we have witnessed mass displacement of 40,000 Palestinians from the north of the West Bank, which we didn't witness since 1967. We are talking about already a war declared into the Palestinians in the West Bank. We have hundreds killed, thousands arrested, and we're talking about a complete fragmentation of geographical cities from the West Bank. So the north cannot access the south. We have more than 8,000 barriers. We're talking about checkpoints, iron gates, mud barriers. So I don't know how we can escalate even more. That scares me. If this is not an escalation, so I don't know what's an escalation.
We've been seeing many scenes of Israeli bulldozers entering West Bank towns and cities over the last few months. Could you give us some detail on the extent of demolitions in the West Bank and how it compares to this the most recent upsurge in violence?
We have been witnessing the coming back, we call it, coming back of bulldozers and tanks that we didn't witness since the second Intifada in the 2000s. So specifically in the areas of Tulkarem and Jenin, Israeli tanks and bulldozers have completely destroyed essential infrastructure, primary pipelines of water. The camps, refugee camps, are completely destroyed. We're talking about the streets, electricity, as I mentioned, water pipes are all destroyed, in addition to houses. And they have been using also airstrikes. So one of the military tactics now is the use of excessive lethal force, which is airstrikes. So we're talking about now a level that we can compare to Gaza, the way they are treating Palestinians all over Gaza and the West Bank, with the destruction that cannot be repaired. When we talk to our partners in the north of the West Bank, they describe that they cannot see streets, they cannot see neighborhoods, because they're almost completely destroyed by the Israeli tanks and bulldozers.
The UK Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, is set to talk to his Israeli counterpart over a British citizen being injured when Israel bombed a UN site in Gaza earlier this week. Are you seeing a specific targeting of medical aid workers in the West Bank?
So this has been going for a long time. Of course, we have been seeing this trend even getting worse and worse. We are recently even working on a report on how that's impacting the mental health of health workers, because they are being a target. Even a lot of health workers are reporting that they no longer feel comfortable wearing medical vests because they know that they will be interrogated, checked. The ambulance will be targeted with live bullets. So the Israeli army military has been systematically targeting healthcare workers in the West Bank and in Gaza. And we have been trying to advocate for the protection of healthcare workers with the UK government specifically for so long. But unfortunately, we're seeing the trend getting worse and worse, with many detained, even sometimes killed, just because they are trying to give like a lifeline for Palestinians who are injured.
And what has been the impact of this specifically on children, particularly when we're talking about not just the physical and infrastructural destruction, but also the mental health impacts as well?
You know, this question scares me a lot. I always wonder what will come out of these children, specifically children who were orphaned or children who've seen scenes that we can never imagine. I cannot say what will be the impact, but I can say that they can never have a normal lives. And I'm not sure if any psychological aid or mental health support can save them from what will happen to all the memories and the trauma they have endured. If you are talking about children in Gaza, we are talking about experiencing starvation, displacement, horrors, bombardment, losing loved ones. I don't know how a human being can be shaped facing all of these. I don't know if there's a case study in a different part of the world that we can compare to. In the West Bank, they are facing also displacement, airstrikes, arrest, detention. So the issue of how children's mental health will be impacted really scares me a lot, because I have no idea what will happen to these children.
Obviously, we're meant to be in a period of ceasefire. Anyone who has been paying attention to this issue historically knows that ceasefires are regularly violated by Israel without much consequence. When the ceasefire was announced, there was a sense of, why now? Why has it happened now after over a year of various human rights organizations, politicians, and of course, activists and campaigners, both within and outside of Palestine, trying to get a ceasefire. Given what we are seeing now, how do you interpret the timing and the intention behind that ceasefire that was meant to see a cessation of this kind of violence, but has seen really a pause followed by a deep escalation?
Let me start by saying, the ceasefire happened when Trump administrations took over the US. So for me, it was part of the campaigning of Trump's to see that he's going to do a big change in the Middle East. So it was just, in my opinion, a marketing campaign for Trump's administration. But on the ground, it was only a temporary ceasefire. After a few weeks of that announcement, Israel again announced a blockade and used starvation as a weapon of war. And that's why this week, we launched a campaign with Christian Aid and Save the Children, calling the UK an ally to atrocities. Because what we have been seeing, a ceasefire that did not last, a ceasefire that was that meant a complete blockade on Gaza. And now we are seeing again the war resuming on Palestinians in Gaza. So I don't know what was the timing in the political sphere. It's not my mandate to talk about, but for Palestinians in Gaza, there was no actual ceasefire. It was a big couple of weeks from constant killing, but that's it. We don't see a ceasefire anymore. And we're still calling for the UK government to stop being complicit in all the war atrocities that the Israelis are committing to Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank.
That was Aseel Baidoun from Medical Aid for Palestine speaking to me earlier today from the West Bank. So, how has Britain, a close ally of Israel's genocidal regime, responded to the resumption and escalation of Israeli military violence across the Palestinian territories? This was Foreign Secretary David Lammy in the House of Commons today.
On the night of the 18th of March, Israel launched airstrikes across Gaza. A number of Hamas figures were reportedly killed, but it's been reported that over 400 Palestinians were killed in missile strikes and artillery barrages. The majority of them were women and children. This appears to have been the deadliest single day for Palestinians since the war began. This is an appalling loss of life, and we mourn the loss of every civilian. Yesterday morning, a UN compound in Gaza was hit. I can confirm to the House that a British national was amongst the wounded. Our priority is supporting them and their family at this time. Gaza has been the most dangerous place in the world to be an aid worker. And I share the outrage of the UN Secretary General Guterres at this incident. The government calls for a transparent investigation and for those responsible to be held to account.
I mean, you think about the idea of someone in Britain who is a healthcare worker and sees the scenes that we are all watching unfolding and says, feels a calling to go and help in this, what has been spoken of as a humanitarian crisis, which of course it is. But sometimes when you say this is a humanitarian crisis, it kind of rips it from its context, and it de-emphasizes the fact that this is a product of very clear political choices. This is not some kind of natural disaster. It is the product of choices, including the choices from our own government. And so that person goes over to a part of the world that is now very, very dangerous and risks their life to do the right thing, only to be killed by a government that their own government, which is meant to be representing them, has been funding, offering political cover for, and even supplying parts for fighter jets for that government. That is, it's absolutely mind-blowing. And the fact that David Lammy is standing up there saying this as if it's something to be so shocked about, even though we have been hearing the same story over and over again for over a year now, and to end it with, and that's why we need an investigation. Like, we know what is going on. We know that this government is giving political cover and sending pieces for fighter jets to a country that is under deep suspicion of having broken international law. We've got the strongest, the ICJ has made the strongest verdict that it can make at this stage in a conflict. And we are still arming people who are, being prosecuted for violating the Genocide Convention. And then after all that, you're saying, well, before we can do anything, we need an investigation, and it's probably going to take ages to happen. And then the findings are probably going to be kind of swept under the rug, or by the time they come out, there won't be anything to be done. It will be too late. And I can just say, well, I did my piece. Well, you didn't do your piece, David Lammy, and you're going to go down in history as being someone who facilitated a genocide. So, Helena, what do you think about? I know David Lammy's like your favorite guy. So are you disappointed to see him offering such meager words in the face of the deadliest day, even though it's meant to be a ceasefire, one of the deadliest days for Palestinians since the war began?
Thing is earlier this week, David Lammy came this close to finding the spine that he's been lost with for the last 17 months. And he got cucked out by his own government, saying he didn't actually mean it when he said that Israel had broken international law and that we needed to have a discussion about whether that they had done. And then he revised his statement. So he couldn't even have the spine to be able to stick with the one thing that he'd said that would have been correct, which is, of course, that Israel has violated international law on loads of occasions with diplomatic cover and with our weapons. He was also questioned in that same sitting by an SNP member of parliament, specifically asking about whether he feels okay with the fact that we've been doing these things whilst Israel have been openly murdering children, hundreds of children that have died. And David Lammy's initial response was just say, please mind your language, and also October the 7th, right? That's it. That was his response to an SNP MP bringing up our government's complicity in, what the United Nations has described as a graveyard for children, which is what the Israeli army have created in Gaza. It's what's interesting about underpins. What David Lammy says specifically underpins his foreign policy prospectus is this idea of progressive realism, which is that, well, we cannot have a world as we want it. We must accept it as it is, but from a progressive perspective. And I'm like, okay, except you're here, you thinking that the Israeli government is somebody that we can have any say over just by only intervening to have conversations with them when only British citizens are the ones who are the victims of their war crimes, when it's the Palestinians, we will not do anything in terms of actually providing material opposition to what's going on. Again, I've said many times that words mean nothing to the Netanyahu regime. They mean nothing to the occupying forces. The only thing that matters is their material ability to or to not be able to bulldoze their way through the West Bank and bomb their way through Gaza. Those are the only things. It's this hard power that the Netanyahu administration understands. That's the actual realist. An actual realist looks at this, and instead of going, well, we need to maintain this link for some nebulous reasons because we believe fundamentally that Britain should be wholesale support of the Zionist project, regardless of the administration that is involved in Israel. No, the realist position is to go, there is no stopping this unless we actually pull our support. That is the progressive and realist position here. And David Lammy is actually the one who is living in La La Land, who's living in cloud cuckoo land, where he believes that we can maintain our pride as a nation, as the nation of Britain that has, again, we were the ones who defeated fascism, one of the coalition that defeated fascism all those years ago, only to be sitting here looking at the same kind of fascism rearing its ugly head again in the form of an ethnic cleansing campaign by the Israeli government, and sitting here being absolutely fine with helping facilitate that through diplomatic support, through aerial support by fighter jets flying, engaging in reconnaissance for the Israeli army from RAF Akrotiri, whilst also selling the government fighter jets to be able to facilitate it as well. That is not the realist position, David Lammy. We are the realists here, not you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that the way in which politicians use this idea of pragmatism and realism to make you believe that the completely absurd, deranged reality that they are trying to sell you is somehow inevitable. I mean, it's obscene, and it's not true. And that's why we're here to show you that actually the devastating scenes that you're seeing on your screens, on your phones, are the product of choices, and therefore they can be the product of different choices. As devastating as it is, that's better than internalizing what David Lammy is saying, which is this idea that somehow this is the only way this can go. It's like, no, this is a product of particular choices, including choices by our government, and therefore we have to find a way to pressure our government to make different choices. And those choices include, as you've said, Helena, pulling the plug on the material support that is facilitating this genocide. Keir Starmer's Labour government has just shaved £5 billion of government spending by snatching it from the sick and the disabled. But that's not enough for Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Next week, she'll give her spring statement setting the government's tax and spending commitments until the autumn. And the Treasury has been busily briefing, testing the waters to see how harshly Reeves can get away with punishing the British public. This was from The Guardian's political editor, Pippa Creer. Rachel Reeves will announce biggest spending cuts since austerity at next week's spring statement after ruling out tax rises as a way to close her budget deficit. Chancellor to tell MPs she intends to cut Whitehall budgets by billions of pounds more than previously expected. Move could mean reductions of 7% for unprotected departments over the next 4 years. So unprotected departments include areas like prisons, courts, and local government. Those are all areas that we know are already buckling under the strain of ongoing austerity. Just last week, Parliament's Public Accounts Committee said the justice system faces total gridlock in 2026, with a growing crisis in our prisons. In December last year, The Guardian reported on the crisis in English courts, where around 60,000 cases are waiting to be heard and 80,000 defendants yet to stand trial. Meanwhile, when it comes to the local government crisis, around half of England's councils could face bankruptcy over a £4.6 billion deficit in funding. Seriously, I mean, you can just Google the name of any central government department followed by the word crisis, and you'll soon get a pretty vivid picture of the kinds of perma-crisis the Tories have left us in, and that Labour seems to determined to keep us in. So why are these cuts coming now? Well, you won't be surprised to hear that the economy is not in great shape. Growth has been poor and is projected to get even poorer. And at the same time, the costs of borrowing have risen sharply. Now, some in the government have blamed US President Donald Trump's trade tariffs for the slump, but the reality is that the buck stops with Rachel Reeves. She could make different choices, but she's so blinded by her commitment to an inflexible economic ideology that she would rather watch the British workforce grow sicker, more unstable, and more exhausted than break with her fiscal rules in ways that might actually stimulate the economy. And some MPs are growing uneasy. This is from The Guardian. Labour MPs now worry that next week's additional spending cuts will put further pressure on Britain's poorest families. One Whitehall source said the government has been clear that departments will have to find more efficiencies. That is why Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, has cut NHS England, and that is why Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, has made reductions to welfare payments. Another said, I don't know how much longer we can go on pretending this is not austerity, when the reality is we're making cuts to vital public services such as police and prisons. It's funny how the big wigs at the Labour Party think that just by calling it something different, people won't notice the material reality that is unfolding in front of them. It's bizarre. Anyway, the lack of economic imagination coming out of the Treasury is having a huge impact on Labour's polling. Polling released today by Find Out Now shows Labour at 22 points in terms of voting intention, with Reform a solid 5 points ahead of them. And the Tories are truly unbelievably now just a point behind Labour. Channel 4 went to Grimsby to ask people who voted Labour in the last general election how they felt about the party now. They began by asking their focus group why they chose Labour last time round.
Thinking back to July last year, what was the main reason you voted Labour?
I feel the Conservatives since 2020 had really let down the British public.
I had been more or less a lifelong Conservative voter, but during their last period in office I got more and more disillusioned, to the point where I thought they really don't care about the common people in the country whatsoever. So I thought with Labour it might change, but it seems they've gone worse.
I wanted the Conservatives out, so that's why I voted Labour.
I think everyone was disappointed with the Conservatives.
What I want you to do is I want you to write up in one word how you'd sum up how Labour has done since they've been elected.
Disgraceful. They've completely made idiots out of most of the public who gave trust to them.
Disappointing.
Disappointing.
They're a failure. Unimpressed. They've not made an impression on me at all.
Disappointing.
So that sense of disappointment and the fact that the respondents had clearly seen zero improvement to their lives meant they were shifting their political directions. And immigration was the catalyst for many of them making that change.
The welfare system as it's set up, it can't be defended.
Is he right or wrong?
You say we can do all this for migrants coming in. Well, why can't we do that for people native to Britain? Like give them a place to live, everything they need to get started on their feet.
And put your hand up if these welfare reforms would make you less likely to vote Labour in the future. Put your hand up. Grab this for me.
We asked those who voted Labour only 8 months ago where they put political leaders and themselves on the political spectrum.
I'm generally moving more far right because of the politics in this country. I've never been that way before.
With a lot of what I'm seeing at the moment, I'm having myself being pushed towards the right because I'm not really having any confidence, certainly, in the way that things are going.
I used to consider myself more centre, but I would be going more on the right side now.
So, look, I think that we're not surprised that is the direction that people are going in because of the categorically untrue story that people have been told, which is this idea that the reason that our public services are being decimated, are not providing for people, is because there are too many immigrants being let in who, as that guy said, we can give houses, we can give healthcare, we can give all these things to migrants, but we can't give them to native people. That is simply not true. It has never been true. We know that immigrants give far more and stimulate the economy far more than they take out. And particularly since the hostile environment, migrants have not been able to access vast parts of the public service of public services. And I would also say that it's important for people to think about the fact that, haven't you noticed that over the past 10 years, our borders and our immigration controls have gotten stronger than they have ever been, and yet our public services are at their most broken? What that should tell us is that stronger immigration reforms or stricter immigration levels or stricter immigration policies do not equal better public services. In fact, the past 10 years have shown us that harsher treatment of immigrants goes hand in hand with a political ideology that is about decimating the welfare state. And people are saying in that clip, that the big thing that is driving them away from Labour are the disability cuts, are the fact that materially, what they want, the concrete thing that they want is better public services, better housing, better healthcare system, better provisions for disabled people, for sick people, for elderly people. That's what they want. And they believe, despite the fact that it's not true, unfortunately, that immigrants are the reason that they don't have those things. But actually, when you look at reform, which is where they feel like they're having to be pushed towards, when you look at the actual offerings that reform are making on the welfare state, on public services, it's no different to what we're seeing coming out of Labour. It's very thin on the ground. They offer very little information when it comes to what they're going to do with the NHS, what they're going to do with public housing, because this is actually, despite what they're saying, a party that is designed for the very, very rich and for the most elite businesses. That is, Nigel Farage's, that's his economic background, that is his constituency. And so when what they do show is all the same kind of rhetoric that we've been seeing coming out of Labour over the past few weeks that everyone hates. It's this narrative that people who are disabled are somehow scamming the system, and that PIP needs to be the threshold to access PIP needs to be higher. They want to make significant amounts of cuts to the welfare sector. That's their offering. And so we've gotten into this really messy situation because our so-called, and the reason why so many people are saying, I feel like I'm being pushed to the right, is because the so-called centre-left party is offering them absolutely nothing in the way of the things that people actually care about. And when it comes to immigration, immigrants are the canary in the coal mine for how everyone is going to be treated at some point. Because since the inception of the NHS, since the inception of a welfare state, since the inception of the concept of social housing, the very rich, represented by parties like Reform and the Conservative Party, and now the Labour Party, unfortunately, have been trying to decimate that vision. They have been against the NHS since the day it was created. They have been against Roosevelt's New Deal since the day it was invented, because they want our state to do nothing but pave the way for them to make profit. They don't want their taxes, the relatively small amount of taxes that they pay, to go towards things that they see as unprofitable. Things like giving your grandma or your grandfather a good pension. Things like making sure that every person in this country has a home, whoever they are. Those things are not profitable. They want the taxes that you and I pay not to go to each other, but to go to servicing massive private contracts for businesses that they own. And so what they do is they begin with a group of people like immigrants as, to say like, okay, so we're going to shift the NHS from a universal service that everyone can access, that is a priority of our government, and say, actually, we need to make it smaller so that people that don't deserve it don't get access to it. They don't deserve it because they're not one of us. And people think, well, that's fair. Yeah, people who are from here should be first in line. And so they vote that through. And then as time goes on, the number of people and the groups of people who deserve the public sector, who deserve an NHS, gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until we end up where we are now, which is where people who can't independently use the bathroom because they are disabled are having their PIP taken away from them. They have now fallen into the category of people who don't deserve a public sector, even though that's what all of us who pay taxes want our taxes to go to. And so what's happened? The rich have gotten what they have always wanted, which is a shrinking public sector, low taxes, and the small amount of taxes that they pay and the relatively large amount of taxes that we pay goes towards servicing private contracts, as we saw during the pandemic, where billions of pounds were given to these private contractors with very, very little to show for it. So you might not like immigrants, you might not like the way that they live, you might not like their religion, you might not like their accent, you might not like them, but the way that those immigrants are being treated is how you are going to be treated if you let them get away with it. And that is the political case that a left-wing party could make, that should make, and has been choosing not to make. And that's how we've ended up in the situation that we're in. So it will be no surprise that given the situation that we are in, that one man came out on top as their pick for the next Prime Minister.
Nigel Farage, in a word or a phrase.
False.
Confused.
Dangerous and an opportunist.
He's a great actor and a showman.
He comes across as relatable.
I think he's a phony, he just plays to the crowd.
Who would you choose to be in number 10? So all Farage and one Starmer.
And amongst those who did not vote last time...
In a word or a sentence, Nigel Farage.
Could be. Too old, he's had his moment in glory. He's been around for God knows how many years now. He's done nothing.
Wrinkly.
I like that.
He's a photo or video opportunist.
Yeah, that's true.
Wants to be every man.
Yeah, proud to be British.
Out of these leaders, if you had to choose, who would you most like to be in number 10 as Prime Minister?
Oh, sorry.
Farage, Kemi, Farage. 7 Farage, 1 Kemi Badenoch.
Helena, was this inevitable?
Yes. Fundamentally, it was inevitable. The point that you made before, which was this aping of right-wing rhetoric from Keir Starmer and everybody who is part of his wing of the Labour Party who now have dictatorial control over policy direction from Labour, all of them aping their rhetoric has essentially closed the door on left-wing politics as they are being seen by the public as the quote-unquote centre-left party, right? Except you can see from where people placed Keir Starmer's politics on their spectrum of left to right, they still put him kind of close to the centre and in some places slightly to the right. So they personally believe him to be not actually of the left in the traditional sense, even though he's supposedly there for the centre-left party. Yet because he has accepted wholesale a bunch of these narratives that come directly from the right wing, it is pushing them to the right more broadly as the Overton window shifts. This was always going to be the position that we would end up in if there was no actual alternative, in the same way as all of the misgivings of New Labour that the public had, most of all, were actually due to the things they did that were right-wing. The consequences of their approach to the financial sector that led to the financial crisis in 2008 were things that people disliked about the Labour government. It was things like their giving in to America and engaging in the Iraq War that people disliked about Tony Blair. These were not left-wing things that the Blair administration did that the public didn't like, and these were the things that people held against them when they voted for David Cameron in 2010. The same thing is happening now. Despite the fact that they're doing right-wing things with a right-wing leader for right-wing reasons, people are looking at that and going, well, we can't trust the left anymore, we have to go to the right, we have to move politically to the right, and they will admit it as well, because they believe that there is basically no alternative at this point. And we also can see broadly that the opposite can also be true, regardless of what you think about Jeremy Corbyn as a political actor or as a leader or in terms of policy. The fact that there was a Labour Party representing genuine left-wing values, they did pretty well in 2017 and captured, 40% of the electorate, far more than Starmer got in the 2024 and is having currently in terms of polling. In 2019, the Conservative proposal in what they were going to do when they were in government is far more progressive than you got from the Conservatives before 2019 and what you're getting afterwards. I was reading through the Tory manifesto that Boris Johnson stood on, and there's a lot of good things in there, like the ending of the freeze in welfare. There was the 14 new hospitals. Can you imagine Rachel Reeves, Ms. Fiscal Rules, saying we were going to build 14 hospitals? No, we're looking at more austerity and more cutbacks because they refuse to engage taxes or change their fiscal rules, which, may I remind everybody, is the reason why the markets might be panicking. Bond yields are going up. This is true, but the actual response from people who deal in gilt trading is they are worried that the fiscal rules might be broken. If she had chosen different fiscal rules, there wouldn't be potential market panics around the corner that is leading her, in the absence of her desire to raise taxes, to consider budget cuts as being the only alternative in the spring statement. This will worsen public services. When people look towards a Labour government to fix public services, the NHS and the cost of living, the two big things in terms of people's concern at the election, and they're seeing that not happening, there is literally one alternative. Centre-right has failed, centre-left has failed. The only place they have to go is to the far right, because they're at the moment, the only left-wing alternative is getting zero media coverage and is in dire need of having an injection of a lot more fight, a lot more kind of gumption in terms of the way that they attack the current government and present themselves as a legitimate alternative in the form of the party I belong to, which is the Green Party. Luckily, there is Greens organised available as a more kind of grassroots left-wing part of the party that's trying to push the party towards a more populist direction to be able to take Reform UK head on as a real alternative to the failed uni-party politics that has got us to this situation, as I said, pretty much inevitably. This is the thing. People wanted to see the public realm be fixed, and they're getting the exact opposite. So much for Anas Sarwar in the run-up to the election saying, read my lips, no austerity under Labour, because that is what we're getting. There's no market for austerity, no matter how many times the McFadden and McSweeney in the background think that we can just look sensible, we can act like the quote-unquote adults in the room, and there is this massive cohort of voters. Well, that cohort of voters does not exist because the voracious monster of private capital has eaten up all of the working class people's wealth for the past 45 years. And now that's all gone. They're coming for the middle class people as well. And once those people become disenfranchised with politics, things get pretty scary. And as I said, the only thing that people feel like they can turn to is Nigel Farage, even though they admit in their own descriptions of him, they don't trust him. They don't think that he is honest. They think that he is an opportunist. They think that he is somebody who is totally fake in how he is trying to look relatable. There is plenty of scope to find a genuine politician that could bring these people over to something more positive, but at the moment, there is no coverage that is able to bring that to these people, and they are looking towards the only alternative, despite the fact they don't even like him or trust him.
Yeah, and I mean, the reason he feels like an alternative, even though I think, as you said, Helena, it's really interesting that actually when you ask them what their opinion on Nigel Farage is, it's not actually very positive. But the reason that Nigel Farage is seen as this potential genuine alternative is not because of the political offering that Reform have, which is very conservative, as in maintenance of the status quo, but also because despite the fact that Nigel Farage himself has never won an election in this country, has never actually been voted in to any position under a democratic system other than the European elections. Our media has, for the past 10 years, even longer, been relentlessly pushing this man as the voice of the alternative in a way that they have not done for, say, the Green Party, which, whatever you think of them, they actually have won elections. They actually have won elections quite consistently, at least more so than Nigel Farage has, over the past 10 years. And so, but their representation in the media is not reflective of their vote share, because Nigel Farage, maybe he's a better media player, maybe he's a bit more ruthless, a bit more brutal, but also because his offering is far more pleasing to the wealthy elite who own all the media, who own all of these kind of means of communication. His offering is far more pleasing to them than the Green Party is, and that's why. But all of this national decline throws a different story from today's Guardian and Financial Times into painful relief. Norway's sovereign wealth fund, which invests the profits from its oil fields for the good of its citizens, has now bought a quarter of London's Covent Garden. Last year, it also bought a large shopping centre in Sheffield, valued at nearly $2 trillion. It's the largest wealth fund. Sorry, let me start that again. So the wealth fund is valued at nearly $200 and therefore is the largest wealth fund in the world. And its sole goal is to protect the wealth of future generations of Norwegians. And it's been such a success, it can now afford to start colonizing declining little nations like ours. Of course, the UK also had vast oil reserves, except we simply sold ours off in Margaret Thatcher's 1980s, privatising our oil producers to enrich shareholders with no regard for the people who actually live here. So Helena, a tale of two countries, one who used its resources to protect the wealth of everyone, and another who used its resources to protect the wealth of a very few.
Yep, it's the tale as old as time, right? In terms of the failure of privatization, in the only the very few who get access to those resources, especially natural resources, right? This isn't something that is the result of one person's innovation, for example, which they should be remunerated for what they've given to humanity. You know, these were just things sitting in the ground, right? Which were part of the sovereign territory of a particular nation. And there was a choice. You could either spread the wealth that natural resource brings forth through its extraction amongst everybody who is part of the sovereign territory of whom it belongs to, for the good of all of those people, like Norway has done. Fun fact, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund owns 1.5% of all shares in the world, which is a crazy fact that I learned when I was researching this a few months ago, because I've been very angry about this ever since. And where you look at us, where we frittered that all away for Margaret Thatcher to be able to pay the dole queues for the deliberate increase in unemployment that she used as an inflation control mechanism in the 80s. They deliberately increased unemployment and used the oil revenue to be able to pay those dole queues as well that were created by her deindustrialization project. You know, this is a giant tale of one massive success and one massive failure. And this should be another stark warning for everybody who looks at Nigel Farage as a political alternative. This man is an arch Thatcherite. This man described the Liz Truss budget that crashed our economy as being a true conservative budget. This has been the free market politics that he has championed and advocated for his entire political life. He would have backed the same thing. Is he the one calling for this kind of thing to happen in the UK? Obviously he isn't. He isn't offering anything materially different in terms of the way in which we shape the macroeconomy. All he is offering to people is the demonization of migrants as the economic woes that have been created by this broad privatization campaign that we have had ever since we inflicted shock therapy on ourselves in the 1980s and beyond. You don't have to look at just Norway to look at how sharing resource wealth amongst the population has these broad-scale benefits for everybody. You look at Botswana, which is one of the more prosperous countries in Africa. They have huge amounts of diamond wealth within their own borders, and the government owns 51% of the shares of the biggest diamond mining company in that country. And what they have used is all of the wealth that is generated to benefit all Botswanans, right? If it can be done in Botswana, if it can be done in Norway, it could have been done here. And yet here we are, where we have more billionaires than we've ever had, and people can't afford to feed their kids and put clothes on their kids' backs. And that is a damning indictment of neoliberalism if ever I heard one.
Is the economy rigged? That's the question author, friend of the show, and ex-trader Gary Stevenson was brought on to debate on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And here's a little taste of what went down.
I think the reality is, for kids from poor backgrounds, it is almost impossible to realistically get even financial security, never mind wealth.
But why do you think you could do it, I could do it, he could do it, but you don't think other people could do it?
I won every maths competition I've ever been in. You know what I mean? Since I was a little kid, I was one of the top students at LSE, and I still had to win my job by cheating in a card game. You know, that's the world that we live in. I don't think that's a very replicable strategy.
So that was Gary, along with some guy called Daniel Priestley, whose job it seems to be to represent the delusions of a free market economy. Now, the point that Gary is making there will resonate with anyone who lives in the real world. And look, what Gary's saying is, I don't come from money. I didn't have the connections that could get me into a good job. So it didn't matter that I came top of my class. It was actually just luck and cheating in a card game, being in the right place at the right time that gave me a look in to a world that was completely out of my grasp. And we all know that. We all know that the hardest workers in this country don't make the most money. You can ask anyone who is a school teacher, a nurse, or a working mum. Like, we don't live in a world, in a country where hard work alone can get you financial stability. In fact, financial stability has actually become a luxury. Being able to have the basics, stable, good housing, keeping up with your heating bills, your grocery bills, your childcare bills, maybe once in a while having a little holiday, that has gone from being a standard expectation for anyone living in a country as wealthy as the UK to the reserve of an increasingly small number of people. And interestingly, Daniel, the guy that Gary Stevenson is up against in this debate, does actually acknowledge that. Have a look at this.
There's a book Charles Dickens wrote called The Tale of Two Cities. And the opening line of the book is, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And I think we've actually gotten to that point here where some people in the UK, it's the best of times. If you, like in your situation, you're booming, you're a globally successful business. I've got a globally successful business. And then there are a lot of people who completely cannot relate to this. Energy prices are now the most expensive in the Western world. House prices are completely unaffordable. It used to take 3 years to save for a deposit. It's now 20 years if theoretically 20 years if you can save for a deposit. Food prices are through the roof. So we're in a really difficult, for anyone who is not tapped into digital economy, fast growth, and all of that sort of stuff, life is getting harder and worse, and things are collapsing.
So we're all on the same page. Everyone has agreed that for the majority of people, the economy is broken. But for Daniel, the answer is simple. People just need to be better and smarter like him.
I was born to low-income family. I grew up in a place that had 24% unemployment. Pretty much the only jobs or opportunities around me were things like the trades, building, construction, pest control, hospitality and tourism. So at 14, I got a job at McDonald's, and then I got a job in a bar and Pizza Hut delivery driving. And I discover entrepreneurship. So I discover books about entrepreneurship, and I discover that some people make millions, similar to yourself. You saw Canary Wharf. I read a book about business ownership. What I see is most often the people who do really well financially who are young, they dropped out of school, they dropped out of university, they started learning how to do things by doing their own research. They start their own business or co-found a business. They take a very alternative path. When people sidestep that and say, okay, I'm not going to get into university debt, I'm just going to go off and actually figure out how the world works, there's actually loads of opportunities.
There's loads of opportunity, guys. You're just not looking hard enough. As you can imagine, Gary and anyone who lives in the real world and not on Instagram wasn't quite on board.
Okay, so I guess we've sorted it then. All of our viewers need to do, just be more entrepreneurial. It's as simple as that. More entrepreneurial, start a business. Listen, my friends can't feed their kids, okay? And if it was as simple as going out and being an entrepreneur, I can bet you they would do it. I can bet you they would do it. I'm sick of multimillionaires telling kids who can't afford to turn the heating on, you just need to be more entrepreneurial. It's sick, Dan, it's sick. But this gives people mental illness. It gives people mental illness.
The thing that I know that gives people mental health issues is feeling that they have no agency in their life, that they can't do anything. Your video where you talk about if you don't have a rich dad, you're screwed. There's no such thing as meritocracy. You're never going to be successful. To me, if I had have come across your content at 19, 20 years old, I would have been screwed. I'm so glad that I came across people who said, Daniel, you weren't born into a rich family. You don't have any bank of mum and dad, but it's cheap and easier than ever to start a business. Start by working for someone who's got a business, then figure out what's your opportunity. And there's a way. There is a way.
I mean, Gary hit the nail on the head there. Like, we've had all kinds of initiatives and stuff about mental health over the past few years, you know, and all this, like, don't be afraid to ask for help and destigmatizing mental health issues. And like, that's all great, but just talking about it doesn't address the fact that we are living in an economy that makes people sick. We are living in an economic system that is generating more wealth than has ever historically existed. Yet more and more people aren't able to feed their kids or find a stable place to live. And instead of calling that out for what it is and saying any system that works that way is clearly broken, we're turning to ordinary people and saying, no, you're the one that's broken. And then we wonder why there's a mental health crisis. Like, I'm in my early 30s. I am surrounded by people who go to work every day, who give everything they've got, and they are coming home to cold houses because they can't afford to put their heating on. And that's like the lucky few people who actually managed to get full-time jobs. There are loads of others who did everything right. They got their qualifications, they got their work experience, they applied for hundreds of jobs, and they're just getting nowhere. And then they open their Instagram or their Twitter or whatever, and they see goons like this harping on about personal responsibility. And unfortunately, a lot of them believe it and they internalize it, and it breaks their spirits. And the reason that people feel like they don't have agency over their lives is because the system that we live in is taking and taking and taking from ordinary people and giving them very little back for their trouble. So basically, like, the conclusion is, like, it's not you, it's capitalism. And that's before you can get to the question of, you know, if we're talking about agency in mental health, like, how can you have agency in your life when you can't even fucking switch your heating on? Hello? Here's Gary again.
When I brought my book out last year, the hardback, I was at some event and I come out, I was drinking in London Bridge. And I come out late, it was like 1 a.m. And some guy come up to me when I was unlocking my bike. He said, I've been watching you on YouTube. This guy started crying. On the street, right, in front of me. He's like, I work so hard, Gary. I work 2 jobs. My mum's sick and I'm trying to help. I'm trying to support and I don't understand why. And I'm sorry that I'm crying. But nobody ever told me that it wasn't my fault before. That's what he said to me, okay? And listen. I believe 100% aspiration, ambition, entrepreneurial spirit. I would never see a kid that has that and say, turn it off, okay? But the flip side of if you just work hard enough, you can make it, is if you didn't make it, it's because you didn't work hard enough and it's your fault. And I would like you to sit and think very hard before you send that message to young men and young women in our society.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I really, really agree with that wholeheartedly. And what struck me there was him, and it's something that we've all heard, we all know this. Many of us are in this category where it's like, you know, I work 2 jobs, my mum, my loved one, whatever, is sick. I can't help them and I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And that again speaks to this idea that people who are struggling because they're just too lazy or they're just not being savvy enough. We know that the hardest working people in our country and the most important workers in our country are not being paid enough to live a decent life. A senior care worker is paid an average of £25,000 a year. Teachers pay 30 grand a year. Nurses, 30 grand a year. Meanwhile, people who have £1 million, just £1 million, which as far as the very rich go, is not actually that much. But if you have £1 million sitting in an investment fund, you will earn an extra £41,000. So that's more than the wage and the annual wage of a teacher, a nurse, or a care worker from interest alone, i.e. literally from doing nothing. Like you just sit back and you just watch it go up on the screen. So the idea that the hardest working people are the most well off or the most secure, or that you can get out of your situation just by working hard, is just not backed up by the facts. And the idea that the solution is for poor people, the solution to inequality, which is, and like in the DNA of our economic system, you can't have capitalism without inequality. The idea that the solution to inequality is for poor people to all become entrepreneurs, I mean, it's a delusional and a dangerous lie, not just because like that's not how it works. Like not everyone can become a successful entrepreneur, but also a proper society cannot survive by entrepreneurs alone. Like we also need teachers and cleaners and midwives and road sweepers and supermarket workers and bus drivers. Like these are important. We saw during the pandemic, these are the essential workers. Where do they fit into the world of people like Daniel, who, by the way, his job is an entrepreneur accelerator? What is that? But in this kind of like Instagram influencer, version of the get on your bike stuff, this get rich quick racket, people with the actual jobs that actually matter are treated with disdain, even though they are the ones that when all is said and done, we actually need. Like we actually need those people to make the world go round, and they deserve a decent life. They deserve not to struggle. It's not actually that controversial. Helena, what do you think of I always think that like this entrepreneur influencer stuff, it's basically just like diet culture for men, like just constantly putting this really, really unachievable goal, like dangling it in front of particularly men, because I think this stuff particularly preys on young men, like dangling this unattainable goal in front of them and just trying to sell them stuff to promise them that like, if they just buy this book or they buy this guy's entrepreneur accelerator services, then they too can become a millionaire. You too can be thin if you just buy this, tea that's going to make you shit yourself. Have you noticed this stuff? What do you think of how Gary did in that debate?
Yeah, I've noticed this for quite a while. I've been talking about the toxic culture, like this hustle culture that we've seen, or I've been talking about it for the last couple of years now. I had a really great chat with the independent councillor Sean Halsall from Southport about this stuff and the way that it affects young men and how they are getting completely removed from the economic system that we've created in the service economy. There's been nothing there for them without an industrial strategy to be able to provide them with a way of giving the families that they belong to a better life. And so they fall into this trap that's been created, this gap in the market that's been weaponized by these people who have survivorship bias. Let's be real. People like Daniel have survivorship bias. They go, it worked for me, therefore it can work for everybody else, despite the fact that loads of luck can be input into this. Every single person who's gotten rich, every single person who's been successful is got there as a proportion of which has just been dumb luck. I have a job that I love. I get to do political commentary for a living, and there was luck. The LBC picked my call out, and I went viral one time for asking a question to Rachel Reeves. That's not going to happen to everybody. People say, but you worked really hard for where you are, Helena. I've worked hard just like everyone else has worked hard. I just had a little bit of luck. And also for every single entrepreneur that exists, for every single wealthy person that exists, there is a public realm that has serviced them to do that requires collective maintenance. And this is the problem. This is the societal toxin of cultural neoliberalism that has been part and parcel of our society for the last 45 years, which is what Gary has so expertly managed to break down in such an accessible way in that clip you just saw there, in which the only metric that we judge people on success is how much money they earn. And if you don't earn that money, that means that you are not a success and you are a failure. And the idea that might not be completely ruinous to people's mental health really is for the birds. And Gary is right to point that out. All this discussion we're having currently in the media around welfare cuts and the explosion in mental health problems, everyone keeps talking about the phones, or they talk about lazy Zoomers, or they talk about this kind of societal contagion of mental health problems through it being popular on social media. That's all total bunk. It's all a bunch of nonsense. Jonathan Haidt can go and shove it as far as I'm concerned. There is a material basis for it. It's why it's happened across society, across demographics, across different regions of the country all at the same time is because the material basis for these problems is through the economic system that we've created, where there's just winners and losers, you know? And that's what we have to think about, rather than this aspiration culture where it's only deemed to be successful if you rise out of your class. Even the Labour Party now, they talk about, we want to let people aspire to be something new, to be something different, rather than talking about, well, whereas that's fine, there's no problem in having that being one of your values. But if you only focus on that, you only focus on individual aspiration and wanting to rise out of your class rather than rising with your class, making the rising tide lift all of the boats, then all you're doing is continuing to separate people into successes and failures through financial mediators alone. And that's the problem. Cultural neoliberalism can only think of itself in terms of individual agency. That's what Daniel was talking about in that clip when he said, well, you're trying to tell people they don't have agency. Well, we're trying to say to people is that individual agency is not the only kind of agency that you have in this society. You can still have a collective agency. If you're working a job that you don't like and you are struggling to put food on the plates, there is a way of being able to make your situation better through collective action as well as individual action. You want to get a better job, that's fine. Not everyone can be a management consultant. We do have to have all of those jobs that you mentioned before. And what these people need is collective agency to ensure that the key workers, the essential workers that keep our society running every single day, have the access to a good life, who can have a holiday once a year, who can run a car, who can be able to get onto the housing ladder so they can get out of the trap of continual rentals. And that collective agency is through collective bargaining. It's through joining a trade union, which we're seeing the lowest numbers of men involved in trade unions in this country for decades and decades and decades. Like, trade union membership is dropping so precipitously amongst men, even though it's rising amongst women. And that's causing the overall numbers to be the lowest of all time in this country in terms of trade union membership. That's a collective way that you have agency of making your life better without competing in the rat race to be the next big thing in terms of being an entrepreneur in the hustle culture mindset. There's also collective agency through political participation. Neoliberalism is a way of trying to get people to disengage from collective action in politics because it's seen to be the preserve of only the elite because they've captured politics. No. If there is a populist, collectivist left-wing movement for people to be able to engage with, that's worth having collective agency to actually change society. Daniel says, oh, well, society is rigged so that you don't have any personal agency. Well, no, we can change society. Society isn't fixed. History isn't dead. Fukuyama, you're also going to come in my crosshairs because you were also wrong. There is no end of history. We can create a better system that does incentivize a way of us coming together and building a better planet, a better society, and a better economy for everyone, for the many and not the few. And that involves us coming together and fighting together. As Gary Stevenson put in his excellent video about Elon Musk and what he wants to have, is that if we're all fighting amongst each other, we're not fighting him. We're not fighting the oligarchs. We're not fighting against the capture of wealth at the top of society, right? And if we forget that, then all we'll have to do is scrap amongst ourselves forever, and eventually we will all lose. But if we come together, the many against the few, then we win. And that's the politics that we need moving forward.
Absolutely. And I think the point you make about luck there is really important as well, Helena. There was actually a study that UCL did where they tracked 200 young people from the ages of, I think it was like 11 to 25 or something. So it was over a really long period of time. And they were working class kids, and they tracked the extent to which luck, which they defined as any incident that had consequence, whether positive or negative, that was outside, that was like, could be classified as outside that person's control. And they found that luck, more than anything else, impacted the social mobility and where those kids ended up. And people don't like to say it. I feel the exact same as you, Helena. I'm doing a job I really like, and I'm able to make a living from it. And I know that is like, sure, I work hard at it, but I don't work harder than my friend who's a nurse or my friend who's a teacher. And yet they are working in much more difficult conditions and with much less support than I am. And I don't find it hard to admit that at all. But also, I think the question of what do we as a society value? I mean, that is a choice. The way you design an economy, it's about designing what you value. And unfortunately, we have built a society where the things that we are valuing, what is wired into our economy to place value on, is on stuff that I actually don't think makes our lives better. Like being a defense contractor, or being the CEO of a gambling firm or setting up, something that's based like any one of these like apps that have these kind of like moonshot, like that, but grow really, really quickly and then, aren't actually offering much of social value. Our economy has designed it so that is where we place value rather than on teaching our kids or making sure that disabled people or elderly people and children are well looked after. Like, we have decided to devalue that as a society and make it really difficult for people to do that. But we have placed incentives towards things that I actually don't think speak to what we actually really care and want as humans, care about and want. Before we go, Gary Stevenson isn't the only friend of Novara Media who's been making waves this week. Our very own Harriet Williamson has been featured in the week for her brilliant article on how buy-to-let companies are now the most common type of business in the UK. Again, that speaks to exactly the same thing where like being a buy-to-let landlord is more economically appealing and more incentivized than being a teacher. Is that what we want? But you can read Harriet's article, Buy-to-Let Landlords Are Dodging Tax en Masse at novaramedia.com. The link is in the description box below. And that's not all. On top of that, our amazing audio team have been shortlisted for an Amnesty Media Award for a recent episode of Novara FM. Called This Is How the British State is Trying to Crush the Palestine Movement, Richard Hames and Simon Childs examine the authoritarian turn inside the British state that's driving a crackdown on Palestinian solidarity. You can listen to that episode on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your sounds. And of course, you can find it on our website too. That link is also in the description. And I just want to say something else about this flush of success. Our work is always really good. I'm always really proud of it. But in a context where the centre is failing and finding itself completely discredited, we are breaking through in new and exciting ways and to bigger audiences. That is in large part down to those of you who support us. Thank you so much. And for those of you who haven't yet signed up, please support our work so that we can truly take on corporate media power in this country. It's only by changing the media that we have any chance of changing our toxic politics. So go to novaramedia.com/support and help us do it by giving us an hour's wage or whatever you can afford each month. You'll find that link in the description box as well. Helena, thank you so much for joining me for this bumper show.
Absolutely banger show this evening. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you everyone at home for tuning in. Make sure you come back tomorrow for another live show at 6 p.m. Until then, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.